Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Hello and welcome to another Harvesting Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Mike McMahon. My guest host here today is the producer, Dr. Roselle. And with me, I've got Gill Holland and a great guest. Gill, you are currently, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
And you're squeezing us in. You're filming something in New York City.
I've got two films premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival.
Oh, wow. So that's big time. So you do a lot of documentaries, and you also do commercial films. So you're a little into everything. So why don't tell me your history, how you got into this, where you're from, and you know what's motivating you.
Yeah, I mean, but the short life history, grew up Davidson, where Davidson College is. My mother was from Norway, spent a lot of time in the outdoors, was an Eagle Scout, a lot of camping, hiking. You know, we planted a lot of trees in the backyard. We had a garden. We were always trying to, grow some of our own food. And there was, back in the 70s, there was a lot of recycling going on. So it was always kind of in the etho, in the zeitgeist. And then, growing up, I, went to law school because I didn't know what else to do. Worked in Paris, France. One of the clients was a film producer, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love movies. People make movies. That's insane. Maybe I can make movies, whatever. So then I moved back to New York City. I'd never even been to New York. I went there for the weekend and had so much fun. I was like, and one of my friends was like, hey, our closet is available. And I was like, here's $400. I'll live there. And I started working for the French film industry and the Cannes Film Festival. I saw a niche for potential distribution of short films. This is before YouTube. So I started distributing short films. People started saying I should be a producer. One thing led to another. My first film was the first film ever to win 3 prizes at Sundance. So, went from complete unknown to, being on Good Morning America and having lunch with Bob Redford. And then 10 years later, I did an environmental documentary called Flow for Love of Water, all about globalization and privatization of water. Way before Flint, but this film 20 years later is even more important today. And at the time it was called, An Inconvenient Truth, but related to water. And at the end of the day, we are a water planet. And then when I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, I heard about mountaintop removal coal mining, which is beyond insane. I couldn't believe it actually existed. And I did a flyover with the environmental group called Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and we flew over these just decimated moonscapes in Appalachia, which is the world's oldest growth rainforest. It's basically North America's temporal rainforest. And so I did a documentary on mountaintop removal coal mining. Al Gore gave us a big prize for that, and then I started developing buildings. And the first building I did with my then wife, Augusta, became the greenest commercial structure in the state of Kentucky. So thegreenbuilding.com. And I became like a green building expert, which was kind of funny because I'd barely owned a car. I'd been living in Paris and New York, and everybody, lives in apartments. So one thing led to another. And then when Mayor Fisher, the mayor before our present mayor, was running for office, I was like, we should have a sustainability office. And so I co-created the first sustainability office in the mayor's office here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Wow. So Davidson College, where was that?
So that's right north of Charlotte. And it's mainly famous because that's where Steph Curry went to college.
I see. Okay. So yeah, North Carolina. So you've been in that Southeast. You don't have the accent or the draw. You've been around the world too much. But my first time when we met a couple of weeks ago at the Derby parties or whatever it was called, I think it was an art show that Steve had going on. And I have a friend from Kentucky that for years and years and years I would see him skiing. and somehow we would just see each other on slopes, probably going back 30 years. And he's always inviting me to Kentucky, to the Kentucky Derby. And I was like, I watch it on TV, but I wasn't sure. So finally I went to Kentucky, and I was quite kind of amazed at it. It's really the community that got me. It wasn't, I mean, the history is amazing. We went to a party before the Derby, and it was it was an old plantation that's now the Historical Society, and it was a great little brunch, and met a lot of cool people there. And then,
and that was probably Farmington, and that was Abraham Lincoln's best friend.
Exactly, that's exactly what it was.
And the Speed family owned the Farmington.
And I guess the building was designed by Thomas Jefferson. So it's an interesting, that deep, rich history. And then the history is intertwined with some of the, stuff that wasn't the greatest stuff, but, slavery, but also bourbon, really was a big thing. And Kentucky's got a lot of cool things. I mean, the regenerative farming that like Steve does is pretty simple when you get so much rain and Kentucky bluegrass is growing everywhere and your animals can eat it. I mean, that's a great sustainable thing. And he's got the bison there. And but I was introduced to a lot of artists, and I was surprised. I don't think anywhere on the planet I've seen an art community that is that
Vibrant.
vibrant. I mean, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason I fell in love with Louisville. I'd never been here. And, City of Arts and Parks, we have, Olmsted's major life, the culmination of his life's work was the park system in Louisville, Kentucky, 19 Olmsted parks in Louisville.
And I'm from Buffalo, New York originally.
Buffalo, and it's a great one.
He designed the city of Buffalo. And then, of course, since then, people who have no taste in design ran a freeway through his parkway system, which is a different story. But he's like the greatest of all landscape architects of his time. But so you got into movie producing, right? And so what other things are you doing? I think I met either you or a partner of yours, and you're doing like something on Paramount. Maybe that was somebody else there, because you're meeting so many people, it's hard to keep track of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an independent film producer, so I do lower budget, independently financed, created, and then hopefully we find distribution. We usually do, but I've only had 2 or 3 kind of studio related projects over time. And you know why bluegrass? You know why the horses in bourbon is because the limestone. We have this beautiful, all this karst and the limestone. So the water filters up through the limestone with all those minerals. So the horse's bones are really strong. The bluegrass is really healthy, and the bourbon tastes really good. So that's why there's horses in bourbon.
It's kind of like
limestone filtration.
Kind of like New York water, right? You have your what draws you to a project? You've done so many great things. What catches your eye? What gets your passion up there when you think of projects? You've talked about some amazing things, but what gets you excited? What gets you to want to be part of these projects?
Well, we have limited time here on planet Earth, and so you have to really figure out how you can have the greatest impact for the least amount of effort, even though there's lots of effort involved, obviously. But, how can you have the greatest impact for your time? And so I try to find projects. For example, the Green Building was this old building on a rundown East Market Street here in Louisville, Kentucky. And by turning that into the greenest commercial structure, over-investing in a falling down 120-year-old building, green roof, solar panels, geothermal, recycled blue jean, insulation, FSC, sustainable wood. We reclaimed a bunch of wood in the building. No VOC paints, blah blah blah. That then became, I call it urban acupuncture. So that then became the positive ripple effect that went down the block, and then I came up with this word NuLu to kind of rebrand the neighborhood because it didn't really have a brand, even though it was 100, blocks of 150-year-old buildings. And now NuLu, I think and there was one place to eat. Now the 17th restaurant just opened last week, and it is
It's a fun town. It really
it's
is.
such a fun neighborhood, probably the most vibrant neighborhood in all of Kentucky.
Yeah. Now, you just brought up, the kind of the same thing that drives me, right? We're realizing there's only so much more time left, and we're trying to make that impact. And so, it's hard to figure out, how do you make that impact? There's a lot of different directions you can go in, but you gotta, I guess as you get over the age of, let's say 40, right? So as you get over that, you have a little bit of self-realization. There's certain things I probably can't do. I don't think I can throw a football in the NFL, or I'm not going to be in a ballet. And so I got to take what skill sets I have. And the biggest part is working with other people, right? So you just brought it up. You're kind of picking a project, or is a project picking you? How do you find people who help? I mean, the hard part is the business part, right? Which is you got to
building the team,
financing. How do you finance? How do you do it?
So well, the interesting thing was, I had friends that went to business school when I was in law school, and I majored in French because I did junior year abroad, and that was the only way I could graduate on time, was to be a French major. But I remember wondering, like, my friends were taking business. I was like, what do you learn in business? That sounds so boring, which is so funny because now, like, I'm a
everything you do has to be business at some point.
Exactly. But I'd never thought about it. And I was very entrepreneurial, lawn mowing, and, I had like 26 jobs by the time I was, 30. But when when you're making a movie is just a micro business.
Right.
You create a marketing plan, a financing plan. You got to figure out who your audience is, who your investors are, your line item budget. You have a crew, timing, etc. When we were doing the green building, about 3 weeks in, I realized, like, oh my gosh, this is exactly the same thing as making a movie. I have a crew, I have a line item budget. We get X amount done per day. A movie, you're lucky if you get 3 minutes of finished product per day on an independent film, 30-day shoot for a 90-minute movie. And same with a building. It's like brick by brick by brick. And, you can complain about the daily work, or you can keep in mind the big picture, like, oh, we're going to have a beautiful building here. So
that's what a producer does. The producer's doing everything, basically.
Yeah. So the producer is basically the developer, and the architect is like the director. And then you have a crew. And sometimes, you have crew members that can be just as difficult as a diva actress on a movie set.
So you're using, sometimes you use the same people that you've collaborated with.
If you get along and you like them and they like you, I always go back to the well. It's always great to keep the same crew. And people I've worked with.
You don't want to retrain somebody or to.
Yeah. I mean, I have directors and musicians on my record label who I've literally been doing records with for 23 years and then other directors I've done 6 movies with. And every now and then you work with somebody and you're like, maybe we won't work together again. And that's.
So you come up with an idea like, hey, I need to do something about the coal, the mountaintop coal. Now, your next thing is, you can create the movie. That's not a problem. You can investigate, talk to people, see what the damage is. You can take aerial flyovers and find out what businesses are doing and what's the profit and loss for the state of Kentucky. You can do all that. That research is something you got to do. Do you get a writer to do that with you, or do you end up writing the script yourself?
Yeah, so it's different. So a feature film, so at Tribeca, for example, I worked on a film called Travel Companion. That's a narrative feature. So we had a script. We then hired a casting director. We cast the script, and we shot 3 pages a day, a little more, but whatever, of the script, right? So that was written, and the actors said the words on the page. With a documentary, like, the whole world is the potential character in your documentary, right? So you start talking to people, you start filming stuff, you have, a general idea of, what the film is about. As a matter of fact, the film Flow for Love of Water, the movie started with this director came to me and said, I want to do a film about, they're trying to privatize the water in New Orleans. And she's Irina Salinas, she's this great French director. And she's like, it's like a Moliere play. It's like, you have the big water company, you have the low income people at the end of the line that might not get service if the water gets privatized. And so we went down there and we filmed. And as we filmed, we met more people. And then they said, oh, there's a water conference in, Tokyo, and there's X, Y, and Z. And at the end of the day, and we filmed for like a year and a half because we would have some money, spend the money, edit down what we had. At the end of the day, there's not one scene in the final movie from New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
The movie became so much bigger.
Did you ever read the book Bottle Mania? I think it was fun.
Yeah, a little bit. We have a funny sequence with Penn and Teller and bottled water.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fun. And so some of the things you're doing, you could have a comedic twist to it if you wanted. Sure. I just watched a show, I think on Netflix, Travels with my father, and it was the comedian, and he had a 80-year-old father, and they traveled the world, and the father and him were completely different people. It was actually quite hilarious. But so pretty much anything. Now, then how do you end up financing this? The director came to you. Does the director already have a person who's going to pay for it? Or
in that case, literally, she was like, I think I bought her a plane ticket. We had access to a little camera, a mic, and then I think I paid, per diem. I just came out of pocket at like $2,000 or something for the first shoot. Wow. And then we edited that, and then we had enough of a trailer, and then we found a real investor, and then I had some frequent flyer miles. I think I got her to Tokyo, and then, that was literally cobbling it together. Other films I've done Kickstarters. Wow. Seed and Spark is a really good crowdfunding platform. We've done WeFunders, which is a crowdfunding investment platform. So it's not a donation. It's actually an investment where you pay back. I've done LLC. I did a documentary on Wendell Berry, the great philosopher farmer behind a lot of the organic food movement. And the Wendell Berry doc, I was like, I don't know if it's going to make any money. So we literally set it up as a nonprofit.
Oh, wow.
So that sounds like most of my businesses.
Well, I always joke, some of my businesses are not for profit, even though they're not registered as 501c3s.
Right, exactly. Well, they're not for profit because they don't make a profit, but exactly. Still kind of run them, right? So, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Are there any projects right now that you're chasing that that nobody's come to you with, but you really, really want to do?
That's a good question. I have a little list. There's books. Like I was trying to make a movie about the Wright brothers.
Oh wow.
There's never been one. And I know why, because it's a very convoluted story and it needs to be like a 5-part series. And anyway, I spent years trying to get that off the ground, excuse pun intended. At some point I'd love to, but independent film, like I can get them made at the studio system. There's a lot of like other people have to greenlight you because of budget. That's a period piece. It would be expensive. There'd be FX flying around, planes. And I prefer to do things where I know I can get them made. And after spending seven years trying to get that made and never got made, so more independent films. But there's a lot of, I've got a bunch of films at any given time. I've got like 5 films a year going on.
So it sounds like there's 2 categories. One, if somebody came to you with endless amount of money, would that be the Wright brothers movie? And then other ones that you just have a passion for, right?
Yeah, right now I would go back and do Wright brothers for sure. Yeah.
So do you have like we did a podcast with someone who did a documentary on Wes Jackson. I can't remember if you said you also did something.
No, but he stayed at our house because he and Wendell Berry are such good pals.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
So this lady was on a podcast a few weeks ago.
The Prairie Prophet and Beer Saves the World.
Cool.
She does documentaries same way, but she found someone that, kind of a benefactor that paid for those projects because they felt those projects were important.
Yeah.
Finding those benefactors is, I haven't found one yet.
Well, but that's, for example, that's why we set the Wendell Berry doc up as a nonprofit, because Wendell Berry has lots of fans. People can get a tax deduction by making a donation to a 501c3, and then my director can actually feed her children and make the movie and get paid.
I got it. Now, you've been traveling, have you done, so Wendell Berry was really about agriculture or just about his life, or because he's the poet of agriculture, right?
Yeah, he's a philosopher, farmer, two counties over here from where I'm sitting in Louisville. And
so we need to do we'll do these sustainable travel shows. It's an excuse for us to go and
well, Mary Berry, his daughter who runs the Berry Center, she would be great to have on your podcast, and I could connect you with her.
Well, we'll do a another Louisville trip, and there's a lot of different people there I'd like to talk to, and there's so many stories that are so rich. But I understand what you're saying. Some of these projects, I've been writing 4 different books since COVID, and which is like, I don't know, have no idea. I'd started writing them because it was basically taking notes on things I was working on, and I wanted to keep them straight because agriculture can be very confusing. There's so many different things like permaculture, which is West Jackson, Wendell Berry. Then you hear regenerative farming, then you hear organic farming, and you get and really all those are alternative farms to the basic industrial farming we have in the West. But that also is only half of the picture. The other half is in places like Africa where there is no industrial, they don't have equipment, no capital, no irrigation. So it's a different form, but literally 50% of the people on the planet eat with that kind of sustainable agriculture. So you're writing these books, I can never get them finished because I keep learning something. Or I find a book and I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what I was trying to write. It's just better than I'm writing. Well, so you just can't ever seem to get a...
Gil, I'm going to do you a favor. You invented 2 words that describe it. So he's going to condense a 200-page book down to those 2 words.
So there's the one word is Agricarcinoma. And that is, what it sounds like, right? And so we have endo and ectocarcinoma. And so with the U.S. and industrial agriculture that we've seen, it's carcinoma from within. In other words, if you're eating Twinkies and drinking nothing but bourbon, and then you get some kind of health issues, it may have something to do with your diet. If you're smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, it might have something to do with what you're ingesting. So that is doing damage to the environment because we literally are putting in these inputs that are not particularly wholesome. They don't create a soil that's healthy. And that's kind of, so we're pumping all kinds of chemicals to grow the plant, not to grow the soil or help the soil. The other side in places like Southeast Asia, Africa, and parts of Latin America, where subsistence farmers are doing their thing, they are growing crops to feed themselves, but they're not necessarily using great practices either. They're not putting back into the soil. There's no rotation of crop types, and they'll grow like a maize, which isn't the best crop in the world. And it's a taker. It takes nitrogen, doesn't put anything back into the soil, and they'll grow for several years on that same property until they desertify it. So that's cancer from the outside, right? And so now they move into the bush to another area that they can grow. And what we see is, and it's happening in the Amazon, it's the same thing as we clear cut and do different things. So that's the concept he was bringing up with the agricarcinoma.
Hey, Gil, I had a question for you. When we met the producer from Beer Saves the World, it's interesting because she's going to come out and screen her movie. What's it like to actually advertise, get that grassroots movement for those movies that you produce? Is it a lot of private screenings? Is it networking? Like, what does that look like to get those movies off the ground?
Do you have a publisher, or do you do all that
Yeah.
yourself?
So basically the Hollywood system is Hollywood, right? Independent film was, kind of in the last 50 years is this independently financed, and there's a circuit. There's the film festivals. You go to Sundance, Toronto, Tribeca Film Festival, where I'll be in 2 weeks. When things go well, you go to these festivals, all the distributors, the buyers, the studios, the mini studios, they come looking for product because even Netflix buys product that they don't create them in-house, even though they create a lot.
They need content, lots of content.
So everybody's always needing content. There's so many different streaming platforms: Tubi, Mubi, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, it just goes on. And then there's, 180 territories around the world. So, and you never know who's going to like what. So, we keep making stuff, go to the festivals, try to kind of get picked up, which is either, they buy it outright, buying the negative, buy the whole film, or they do a license, a 3-year license to Netflix, a 10-year license to Lionsgate, and then you hope in those deals, and you can sell the world, or you can go territory by territory, depending on, who you are and, which market might like the film. So it's when it works, it's a fun, good business. And, most indie films lose money.
So honestly, you said you had great success with your first movie and it changed your trajectory. I'm sure you have, in your opinion, what is that special sauce in those movies that just went really well that you think just made it take off? And how do you try to encapsulate that in everything you do?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get lucky. I mean, now, the crazy thing now, when those first movies were coming out, there was no such, nobody knew the word algorithm. But, I had 2 musical acts go viral on TikTok during COVID. Right. And we still to this day do not know how it happened. But, I signed a 15-year-old who's now a world famous rapper named Jack Harlow. And then I had this band called Girlwood, which they call themselves Kentucky Fried Queer Punk. And there was like a 2-week period where the top 2 of the top 6 most streamed TikTok songs in the world were these 2 acts from Louisville, Kentucky. And to this day, we have no idea how we hit the algorithm and we got lucky. Wow. So you're always trying to catch lightning in a bottle. I mean, sometimes on a movie set, you can feel that it's just coming together. Like, and there's this thing called star quality. And I was super skeptical, did not believe it until you sat through all these audition tapes. And then sometimes you're like, you didn't even see it in the room. And then you're watching the tape after and you're like, oh my gosh, they're a star. I can see it. I did, And so there are people and actors you meet in real life and you're like, they seem so boring or not whatever. But on film, you're like, oh my God, I love them.
They have some kind of passion that.
Yeah. And then sometimes, the characters really do have an interaction, romantic or otherwise, and then you feel it. So there is a magic to cinema. It's just a reality.
Is it all the success story driven? We find that so many things are story. We have to tell the story, right? So
it's all about communication. Humans love stories, and that goes to real estate. You got to tell a story about the green building. You got to tell a story about Kentucky sustainability and agriculture. Kentucky back to bluegrass and water. We got the Ohio River. We're the 3rd most water-rich state. We've got 76,000 small farms, average size 160 acres. Okay. So despite having some more tornadoes than normal, in general, we're a pretty good climate refugee state because of locally sourced food opportunities, and we're not going to run out of water.
Right. You got water as well, which is, there's parts of the world all the way from there up to Michigan that, that has a water problem because there's too much, but, and maybe continuing, right? We could see Florida underwater soon enough, but yeah, we have projects in Africa, and it's the same kind of concept is how do we raise awareness and raise any kind of money, because we're in communities where there's 5 different schools, 6,000 children, no electricity.
Yeah.
There's no, and telling that to people, you can say that to people all day long and somehow it doesn't resonate. So you have to, so for us, it's always a matter of, trying to get it to resonate, tell a story and try to bring, and so we started an ecotourism in Zimbabwe which would be a cool project for you. This family that's been there a long time has 100,000 acres. The first 50,000 they've turned into a conservatory, but they're rewilding animals. And the center, they're using a bit of commercial industrial farming on small, because you don't need as much produce, but there's villagers, people who live on their property, which is bizarre. If you had a property in Kentucky and you literally had a village of people living on it. So it's a different way of, and there's schools on it and that kind of thing. And the idea for us with urban farming is to try to bring some kind of climate smart agriculture. I don't call it I could call it regenerative, call it whatever you want, but I'm a realist. To use whatever methods you can that continue to allow you to grow more produce without sacrificing the environment. That's basically it. But they are bringing animals back in. So it's this bizarre Jurassic Park thing. You're in a center pivot where you've got cattle, and then there's warthogs and zebra and whatever. The elephants are always
on the other side of the trench.
Yeah, they got a big trench around it. So but nobody even knows. And I said, how come, nobody knows about it? There's only 2 or 3 people in the world, or from what I can tell, only a handful of big scale operations where they're rewilding. And the idea is to get all the local villagers to understand. So they brought in a different breed of cattle that has got more weight to it and can feed. And so they're breeding. They have a breeding program with the villagers for that. And they're doing a lot of different things with chickens and showing them how to do stuff. But to me, that's the most fascinating thing on the planet. You're going back to Kentucky's prehistoric compared to Phoenix.
I love that. Somebody should be doing a documentary about you. There's a sustainable farm in Ethiopia that I just saw a short documentary about.
Well, I was in Addis Ababa 2 years ago and went to.
Well, okay, so I'm almost afraid to ask this question because I did have a conversation with another nonprofit, and we just off the cuff said, "Hey, we should create a documentary." I know it's more complicated than that, but let's just okay, well that's great.
Just now it's like my friend Sean Baker shot the movie Tangerine. He just won 4 Oscars for Nora, but he shot Tangerine on iPhones.
So, but what advice would you give us if we were going to do this project? If you're advising us and you gave us great encouragement, what would you tell us to do as far as next steps?
Make sure you have good sound as you're interviewing people, but literally you can have your iPhone. Just get a special mic, because the sound, if you have bad sound, everybody always jokes like, we'll fix it in post. It's very, very hard. Sound is so important.
We found that.
We've made that mistake.
Yeah, there you go. So, and then just start shooting. And because the thing with documentaries is like, there's almost no cost barrier to entry. Anybody can start filming their friends. You're already working with people. You're in they don't have to look great. Literally, when we were back to making Flow for Love of Water, she ended up having to shoot it and teach herself how to be a director of photography because we couldn't afford to hire a DP anymore. And I was like, look, we want to keep making the movie. You're going to have to shoot it and you're going to have to mic them up. And, so we went from a 3-person crew to a 1-person crew. And then she basically, and you could see like how the images got better as the film went along. But if the story is good, people are very forgiving of the image.
So lead us through the process. Okay, now we're going to take our cameras with us to Africa. We're going to film it. We make this film. What do we do next? We have no connections in your industry. Where do we go next?
Well, you talk to me. So then, what I would do is you're going to have to pay an editor. That's really where the money starts starts being necessary for documentaries. So you're going to want to hire an editor, and you're going to want to cut whatever footage you have. If you have 30 minutes of footage, you'll be lucky if you get like 2 minutes of a trailer, and make a little trailer so people know what kind of movie you're making, what's it about, who's in it, do they look charismatic, compelling, what's the conflict, is there going to be drama, or is it a biopic where there's not a real huge drama, but you're fascinated with these people and you want to see what they're doing? Is it an educational documentary? It's going to be on PBS, so like you got to know it kind of, and you won't know with a documentary what kind of doc it is until you're kind of in it. And then once you have the trailer, then you can send it back to people like me, and then you start building your team.
So as far as the editor, we do work with a lot of students and interns. Is this something you need to hire a professional for, or what are so we can work with students then? That would be a good project for them.
And we works with the university.
Yeah, a lot. I produce and exec produce a lot of films from kids who've just graduated, because I'm all about discovering new talent. That's where, again, back to impact. I can have the greatest impact. Anybody can hire Julia Roberts and love her, and Aaron Brockovich. That's one movie I wish I had been a producer on. I love that, an environmental narrative, like compelling movie. But if you have $10 million, you can pay her and she'll probably be in your movie, is my guess. Where the challenge is finding somebody new that you believe has talent, and then helping nurture, enhance their career, and kind of create another
next
artist.
Well, Gill, thanks for that, because you kind of broke down some barriers for that. And anybody watching, what you're saying is just get your camera out there and tell a good story, right?
Yep. Greenlight yourself. I always say greenlight yourself.
You
so many people in Hollywood sitting around waiting for some gatekeeper to give them permission to get their movie made. And I'm like, just start shooting. And if you look at some of the great directors, Chris Nolan, Darren Aronofsky, their first films, they made for no money. They shot on weekends with their friends, black and white, but they, after, a certain 6 months, they had enough footage that they cut together a movie. And then now they're both super famous directors making $100 million.
So we get it edited, we film it, we get it to you. What do we do in order to help get it off the ground? What's the process?
Well, that's the, bring people in early enough that as you're still filming, you'll have a little trailer, because like your Zimbabwe Rewilding, that sounds super interesting. And then at some point you're like, okay, do we need to go talk to an expert at, World Wildlife Foundation or Fund or whatever? Or, oh, is this something like Matt Damon would want to be the narrator for? Or, so you're going to, at some point you decide, like, is it going to be how big can the film be? And then do you raise more money and try to get Matt Damon to be the narrator? Or you're like, okay, this is more a PBS film. Let's find a nonprofit fiscal sponsor who's interested in rewilding generally. Let's try to get some donations, and you make a 52-minute film for, European TV.
Oh, we'll go to Kentucky. Are you a bourbon drinker?
So Old Forester and Woodford Reserve.
Okay, because when I went to Kentucky, everybody asked, "Are you a bourbon drinker?" Because I think bourbon is, with the new generation, they're drinking tequila or something, and so and I was like, "Yeah, I'm a bourbon drinker." Oh, okay, you're in the club. So we'll head into we'll go back to.
Is that like a Guinness thing? You go to Ireland, you drink Guinness. You go to Kentucky, you have to drink the bourbon. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so.
Drink local, right? It's more sustainable.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. More sustainable. You have to drink bourbon then.
And also here, it's like half your friends work in the industry, so you want to support the, whatever. It's like listen to local music, eat local food, drink locally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had the Derby pie, and I had the bourbon balls, and there's all kinds of different things that I tried that were strictly Kentucky. But so yeah, we'll try to get something maybe in the fall or early winter where we head down. Hopefully you're in town. Tell us the two movies that you got at Tribeca that are coming out right now. What's the titles of those?
So they won't come out for national consumption for, 12 months after Tribeca.
Okay.
One's a documentary called Freeman Vines, about an outsider artist who makes guitars. He's an old black man in rural North Carolina, and he makes a series of guitars from the wood from the lynching tree.
Oh, wow.
Oh my God.
And when I heard about that, I literally called my director. I was like, you got to meet me in film. he's dying of
That's a story, right?
That's a
right. That's a story. Like just can't you know. So and then
how's that music? The music is great. His guitars are
music's great, and yeah, we actually just released it. The soundtrack's already out. And the other is a narrative first-time feature from two young first-time directors called Travel Companion, and it's about a filmmaker who's benefiting greatly from the fact his roommate works for the airlines, and so he gets free airplane tickets. He's the travel companion. So he takes his roommate to his friend's screening. The roommate ends up kind of crushing on this girl, and so our hero gets nervous that they're going to fall in love, and he's going to
lose his companion pass.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's a very light comedy, and it's very well done. And when I read it, I was like, I mean, there's not like a huge narrative arc. This is almost like what we would call mumblecore. I was like, man, you're going to have to nail it with the actors. They're going to have to be so good to pull this off. And darned if they didn't, they really, yeah. So it's a really cute film. It's going to, it's not selling to Fox.
So when you're done, does somebody come and say, change the name or make you reshoot some of it or anything like?
I mean, rare with independent films, very rarely. Usually they see it. The risk is it's totally de-risked. Like all the risk is us. We've raised the money. We cast it. Nobody died during the, like we got it made. We edited it. Like it is here it is. You either like it or you don't like it. So, I mean, very rarely is there any changes in an indie film.
That's good. So we'll see those two movies at some point.
Are they going to be cast in Phoenix? Because we actually when we do our podcast in the studio, it's actually in front of an audience. So we are doing castings for Beer Save the World, which is only 10 minutes, but would love to cast those movies out here. That would be incredible. Oh, yeah. That's one question. The other one, where do I get the soundtrack from? Is it on Apple or how do
Spotify, yeah, Apple, Freeman Vines, yeah.
What's it called?
Freeman.
Well, and we also did a playlist for Travel Companion. I'll email it to you and you can post it.
Awesome. Yeah, great. So, well, Gill, we will be in touch in the future. Yeah, I guess you have what a great job you got because you're kind of like the podcast. There's somebody you want to talk to. Yeah, I like, okay, you're interesting. Let's get you on the podcast. You're doing the same thing with cool, interesting stories. And a lot of them are stories about sustainability or about perseverance or they're unique stories that touch you first. That's why you pick the project, right? So it's cool to be able to do that and to get that public awareness on things. You never know what triggers some kind of social change for the better, right? So that's great. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast today. Gill Holland, is there we'll get any website or anything that you want if you have.
I mean, I post things on my LinkedIn is where I have updates on what's going on.
Okay, great. And we'll be in touch with you again when we try to go to Kentucky. And yeah, if you want to have your movies screened at our next event, it'd be great. We'll have we have a great little podcast studio. It's good size, but it's
an old Del Monte canning factory. So the setting's great.
Yeah.
I mean,
so we'll have I don't know, there might be a Phoenix Film Festival. It's not a film festival per se, but it'd be a great time to do a screening of a lot of short movies.
The short's only 12 minutes long.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's
great. I'll send you the short in 2 weeks, and then I mean, I could help set up a whole. There's also that environmental film festival that travels around, and you could also, get that to come to Phoenix.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, great.
Because we're partnering with ASU and GCU students, and really, we work with the younger kids, but to tell those stories and get the kids excited about filmmaking or some of these causes would be fantastic. You changed my mind about making a documentary.
Well, and Peter Beck, who I was telling you about, the great, he teaches at ASU, so he's in Arizona.
Oh, wow.
So I thought I was told about Peter. I think Gray was telling me. I mean, Gray was moving a million miles a minute, so I was like, slow down. I can't get everything. She has so much information and history, but she told me about him, but I thought I was confused. I thought he was a soil guy.
Well, yes. So he started, he got famous for doing a whole piece on how we should have more cows because the cows help disturb the soil and then help the roots grow deeper.
That's our South African guy that's been around for a long time.
So it was kind of a controversial thing there for a while. So yeah, he's a big soil.
Yeah,
but
that's the guy. I couldn't remember. I didn't get that.
Thank you for helping me check that box. As he said, you got to get in touch with this guy. So done. He's gonna make the introduction. That's great.
I could only remember Peter. So we'll get him on a podcast.
Awesome.
Well, great seeing you, and
Thank
enjoy.
you so much.
You're staying in New York now, between now and Tribeca.
I'll go to New York next week, and
great.
I'll be there for it.
That's fun. Yeah, good. All right, good seeing you, and I appreciate you on the podcast. Anyone who's watching this can certainly subscribe, hit like, and we'll have all your information here as well on the podcast, so people can connect. And we keep a website of podcasts, so people can look back at this 10 years from now when you're winning all your Oscars or something.
There you go.
Okay. All right.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.